Okay. This year, Germany urged the UN Security Council to deal with climate change as a global threat. Why do you think it's a security issue, and why did you take that step?
Well, we believe climate change is such a vast challenge to mankind, which will include, let's say, a major redistribution of access to resources. Climate change will affect the way we live, the way we work, and it's inevitable that we also will see that climate change will have drastic economic consequences. If you just imagine that an effective climate policy worldwide would lead to, let's say, that 90% or more than 90% of all known oil, gas, and coal reserves would have to stay where they are in the soil, you can imagine what this would mean, for example, for fossil fuel exporters. So all in all, if you also take into account the effects of extreme weather events, rising sea levels with territorial changes and low-lying islands doomed to disappear in the future, we believe there are very strong arguments to put climate change on a foreign policy agenda. So it was just logical to have the highest foreign and security policy body that we have, the United Nations Security Council, get involved and get engaged and have a look at climate change as one of its topics.
And what was the response of the other UN Security Council members to Germany's move?
Well, in the end, all 15 agreed to the presidential statement that we have put forward. Presidential statements have to be agreed by consensus, so there was full consensus on what was in the statement, and this is in particular, A, climate change is a threat to peace and international stability, and B, that the Secretary General was asked to involve climate change in its reporting about conflicts to the Security Council. If you follow the debate in the Security Council, you might have noticed there was, in the beginning, no unanimity on the importance and the relevance of the topic. But we believe that with the written statement that we got in the end, the Security Council has made a major step in a good direction.
And a poll released just this week shows that amongst European publics, climate change is the second biggest perceived issue. Is the European Union and European politicians, are they in a position to lead on this issue now?
I think Europe is in a very strong role. It plays a pivotal role in international climate negotiations. And we also pushed EU foreign ministers to look at climate change as a diplomatic and foreign policy challenge when we put this to the Foreign Affairs Council also in July this year. We got some council conclusions, which is always very important in Brussels speak because it means concrete points of action for the European Union and its member states. And now we need to work on these council conclusions and do some follow-up. Basically, we see three areas for climate diplomacy for the European Union. That is A, supporting the climate negotiations. That is B, encouraging and promoting forward-looking climate policies of countries worldwide, and C, looking at the security and foreign policy implication in a narrower sense of climate change. These are the things that I just mentioned earlier in this conversation.
And you mentioned the climate negotiations there. Europe's been criticised for not taking a more ambitious stance when it comes to mitigation. Do you see any potential for this to change in the near future?
Well, I think Europe has shown the most ambition when it comes to climate negotiations, and it has shown that it's very determined to make progress on climate protection with the 20% goal it has set itself for 2020. And if you look at the figures, Europe has exceeded its Kyoto obligations already and is in principle willing to go for a second commitment phase given other major emitters are also on board. So I think in terms of climate ambition, there's nothing that people can hold against Europe. What we would perhaps like to see is that other major emitters and other industrialized countries would follow our example and show a higher level of ambition in the negotiations. But there's still some time left to Durban, and I think it's good to remain optimist and see how far we can go until Durban. It's still 6 weeks to go.
And one of the calls here today is for Europe to be even more ambitious, to step up and target 30% emissions cuts. Is that on the table, do you think?
Well, it would always be nice to have higher figures, and I would be the first one to say let's have 40 or 50%, but one should stay realistic, and Europe has set itself a goal of 20% and has always said we are willing to go up to 30% if we see other major emitters following our example. This has not taken place so far. So if Europe now leads the way and increases its ambition without, let's say, looking at other emitters, it may also send the wrong signals. I think we should be really careful not to give the impression that Europe on its own can solve the climate problem. This is certainly not true, because the share of European countries in worldwide CO2 emissions is getting lower and lower. So even if Europe becomes super ambitious, we can send a strong political signal, but it will not save the world's climate.
And we've just touched on the UN climate talks in Durban, which is coming up. How optimistic are you that there might be some progress made there?
Well, I mentioned I'm optimistic. And the recent talks in Panama have given us good text to work upon, have also shown us avenues of finding agreement. And now it's up to the, let's say, critical parties of the convention and of the climate talks to come up and be more, let's say, positive thinking and forward-looking, and to be willing to accept a good result. It will not be the fault of Europe if there's no good result in Durban, that's for sure.
And who are the critical parties? Who is standing in the way of progress?
Well, we see that some major emitters, be it the United States of America or China, have their own thinking about how to come best to a solution for the world's climate. We know that some fossil fuel exporting countries are somewhat reluctant to see their business model waning, and we know that there are some countries who would like to be to have even a higher level of ambition, but what we believe is difficult to realize. So in the end, it's a question of pragmatism and realism that it's needed to come to a positive outcome.
Thanks very much for your time and to speaking to us. It's been really interesting.